Hello friends, welcome back to another video and a very big special hello if you are new. My name is Kaycee and today I'm going to be sharing with you 10 books that I am dying to reread. Some of these are books that I've read so many times I can't even keep track of the number. Some of these are books that I've only read once. Some of these are books that I've read like fairly recently, and some of these are books that I haven't touched in years. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. I didn't really know how to organize the books because they kind of cover like a vast array of genres. So I've alphabetized them because that's just what made sense in my head. The first book that I have for you is A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. I read this book years and years and years ago and I loved it. It was really sad at the time, and it was a book that I didn't know if I would have the emotional like stability within me to ever reread, but I've been thinking about it quite a lot and it's just one that I really want to come back to. This actually isn't the edition that I read. I thrifted this edition a few years ago, but I think it's beautiful and I think it fits the nature of the novel very well. I've read two Hemingways. One was okay and this one I loved. So I'm very open to him as a writer and kind of exploring some of his other works. So it doesn't really make sense to reread a book of his, but I can't help it. I really want to reread this one. This is set during World War I on the Italian front. It tells the story of an American ambulance driver and his affair with an English nurse during the war. I love kind of historical fiction books. I love books set in World War I and World War II. I feel like I'm a little partial to World War I now because I feel like I've just read so many books set in World War II that World War I just feels a little bit more unique. But I just think this is a really beautiful classic and it really helps kind of solidify or prove why Ernest Hemingway is a writer despite, you know, maybe not having the best personal life, but why he is a writer who has endured like generations. Next, I have my favorite book of all time, which is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. I read this book for the first time, I think I was like 18 or 19 years old. I think I might have been a senior in high school. And I have reread it every couple of years since. Every time I reread this book, I have a different experience and something different sticks out to me. You know, the first time I was just mesmerized by it. The second time was when I was in undergrad studying to be a teacher, and there's some really beautiful lines about a teacher that Francie had, and I was like, oh, that's the teacher that I want to be, and that really stuck out to me. When I got older and read it a few years after that, I just felt so much sorrow for Francie's mom and dad. And then the last time I read it a couple years ago, I like cried uncontrollably through the ending. So I'm really curious to see, now that it's been like 2 or 3 years, to see what my reaction will be for this book. But again, this is my favorite book of all time. If you want to get to know me and my heart, just read this book because this is it. It's in these pages. I feel so seen by this book. But it is a coming of age story. It is set in, I think it's during the turn of the century in Williamsburg, in Brooklyn, in New York. Francie is a second generation of immigrants that have immigrated. Both of her sets of grandparents had immigrated, and that's all it is. It's literally just about her growing up, but it is the best book I have ever written. I've not written this. I wish I had. But it is the best book that I have ever read. And I don't think I will ever in my entire lifetime read a book that is better than this, and that my heart understands, or understands my heart, I guess, rather than this book. The next book that I have is Brooklyn by Colm. Hang on, I'm going to look up how to say this.
The name of this Irish novelist, as well as, so to say, more interesting and often mispronounced Irish names too. So make sure to stay tuned for those. How do you say it? Colm, Tóibín, Colm Tóibín.
Okay. Colm Tóibín. I read this when the film first came out, so it's been quite a while, but I remember loving this book. It tells the story of a young woman from Ireland following World War II. She is sponsored by an Irish priest in Brooklyn. So she leaves basically her home and her family behind and moves to Brooklyn and tries to create a better life for herself while sending money back to her family. I loved this book a lot, like I said, when I read it, and I adore the film as well. Saoirse Ronan is one of my favorite actresses, so it's a beautiful film. But if you read this book, there's a little bit, I guess you could say, of a love triangle. I hate kind of putting that on it because I feel like that could reduce it, and it's so much more than a love triangle. But there is kind of like a wrestling from her new life in Brooklyn to her past in Ireland. And I will say that what kind of happened in the ending, I wasn't the most happy about. I kind of wished at that time in my life, again, I don't know how I'd feel when I reread it, but I kind of wish that she would have chosen the other person and the other life potentially. So, again, I've always been kind of curious to see years down the road how I would feel about it, or if my perspectives has changed, because I think our perspectives are always changing in how we perceive books as we age. But also there's a sequel to this book that came out like last year, I think, and I would love to kind of pick up, reread the story, and then follow it into that sequel and kind of see where, I think her name's Ellis, his life has taken her. I think that will be just fascinating. So I really, really want to reread this one very soon. Next, I have Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. I read this book years and years and years ago too. I think I was like coming out of my late teens into my early 20s. I had read, what is his other book? I have it over there. Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I had read that a few times and I really enjoyed it, so I wanted to reread something else by him, so I picked up this one. I've only read this one once, but I remember loving it, and I loved it so much more than his previous novel. So I'm, again, just kind of curious to dive back into this one and see what I think about it. Basically, it talks about a young man who has the same name as our author, and he sets out to find the woman who may or may not have saved his grandfather from the Nazis. He is accompanied by an old man who is haunted by memories of the war and an anxious dog named Sammy Davis Jr. Jr. I think this is... He is a Ukrainian translator, and he leads on this journey through a devastated landscape and an unexpected past. I just remember this book being incredibly human and heartfelt and whimsy and fun. So I feel like it could have been a very heavy novel, but I think the balance of the writing and, again, kind of more whimsy and quirky circumstances and characters helped kind of balance that. I really want to read this one. It's been on my radar for a couple of years, so hopefully I get to this one fairly soon. Next, I have The Humans by Matt Haig. This is my favorite Matt Haig novel. I adored this one so much. Again, this is one that I read quite a few years ago, probably like, I don't know. I feel like we kind of associate our life like pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. I think this was pre-pandemic for me. This is a dark comedy. It's basically this man dies and this kind of alien robot type of subspecies inhabits this man's life, and he has to learn to fit in and be human. This is a really beautiful tale of the human experience and compassion and feeling for other people. I really loved this one, and I found it, again, kind of like the Jonathan Safran Foer book. It was just one that could have potentially been a very, very heavy read, but with kind of the whimsy and quirkiness, it kind of balanced it out. But again, it was just a really beautiful tale. And this was also one of the, I must have been staying in a hotel when I read this for the first time. We have a Holiday Inn notepad here. But I've totally lost my train of thought now. But those kind of elements help really balance it out. So I'm, again, just kind of curious years down the road, like what my perspective will be. I've read quite a few of Matt's books since then. So I'm just, again, curious to kind of come back and see if this will like stand as my favorite one of his novels. Next, I have The Little Prince. This, like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, is a book that I kind of come back to every few years. Again, this is just a very beautiful and heartwarming book. And every time I reread it, I have a different experience. So sometimes I just can, you know, read it and enjoy the beauty of this book. And then sometimes I sob. So it really just, it's probably hormonal. It just depends on where my hormones are. The Little Prince tells the story of a little prince who kind of rules over his little planet. This is him on his teeny tiny planet. And he basically travels throughout the solar system and ends up on Earth. And it's basically just a tale of loneliness, friendship, love, and loss. It's, again, very, very beautiful. I actually, kind of a random, like, fun fact, I have always been obsessed with Charles Lindbergh. I got obsessed with him when I learned about him in middle school. I have, like, his biography of him. But I also really adored his wife, Anne, and I've read some of her journals and different things on her. And her and the author were actually very good friends, which is what led me to reading The Little Prince. Just kind of a side note, and I think that this is a really beautiful edition. I thrifted it. It doesn't have a date in it, unfortunately, so I don't know. It says 1943, so I don't know. It's quite old, but it's in great shape and it's beautiful. So this is another one that I want to read, and I think this will probably be a book that I'll just revisit one day when I don't have anything going on, because it's easily read, like from cover to cover. Next, I have My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I read this book years ago. I feel like kind of when it first started gaining popularity, I read it that summer. I feel like all of these books have been read around the same time. But again, this is one that I really want to revisit soon. I really wanted to revisit this summer, but I realistically don't see that happening. So maybe I'll kind of prioritize it more so next summer. But this follows the story of two young women who were friends throughout childhood, from their childhood in a poor neighborhood in Naples up through their adulthood. So I only have the first one here, but I have the other three. And again, I think just having a more adult perspective, I was in my very early 20s when I read this for the first time. So I think years later, kind of having just different perspectives, kind of seeing what I think about it, how the story's changed. And also, again, it's been so long since I've read this book. I feel like there's so many details. While I do remember the overarching plot, there's so many little details and intricacies within these novels that I've forgotten. So I would love to reread them. I follow a girl on TikTok named Elsie, and I'll put her name on the screen. And she has a YouTube channel too, so I'll link it. But she's been reading these for the first time. And it's been really fun to kind of see her reactions. And I think it's kind of really made me want to read these books really soon. But I feel like they're books that you kind of have to read during summer. So we'll see, maybe next summer. Next is a book that I actually don't own, so it's one that I'm going to have to keep my eye out to actually pick up, and it is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. So this is kind of a science fiction-y novel. It tells the story of three young adults who were raised at a boarding school in the English countryside. And as they grow up, they realize that they have been genetically kind of engineered to be organ donors. And, you know, eventually as they kind of hit adulthood, that's it. Like, their life is over. They are nothing more than donors for, like, I think it's more wealthier individuals. I read this book years and years and years ago. I think I borrowed it from a friend, and it is a book that has just stuck with me throughout the years. It's a book that I think about fairly often. I think that it's being turned into like a mini series or something like that. So I think I've seen it kind of have a resurgence in popularity. I've read a few Ishiguro books outside of Never Let Me Go, and I've really enjoyed those as well. And again, it's just kind of with the theme of this video. I think it's just another one years later with a different perspective, you know, being older, just seeing like how I feel about this book and kind of the thoughts and emotions that it provokes, you know, 10 years later. I have 2 more books left. The next one is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. I loved this book in middle school and early high school. I think I read it once after I graduated high school. When I was in like early college, I came back to it. But I've not touched it since. And again, it's just one that I want to come back to. I have different perspectives. I'm a lot older now, and I just want to see kind of how I feel about it. This tells the story of a young man named Ponyboy. He's orphaned, and he lives with his 2 older brothers named Derry and Soda Pop. They have a little bit of a gang. They're called the Greasers. They are from the poorer side of town, and they're called the Greasers because they like grease and slick back their hair. I think this is set in like the 50s, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember. And then they have a rival gang, which is the wealthier neighborhood, from the wealthier neighborhood, which is called the Socius. And basically they kind of pull pranks, and I don't want to say it's not harmful, but they kind of just have like petty little disputes, and eventually one night it leads to a really like dramatic turn of events that impacts a lot of lives. And again, like I said, this was one of my favorite books growing up. I would really like to kind of see my perspective as an adult and see what I think about it. S.E. Hinton was like 16 when she wrote this book, which is like flabbergasting to me. But yeah, it's one that I really hope to come back to at some point. And last but not least, I have War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I read this in 2020 during lockdown. I read it that summer. And I love when I find little trinkets inside books, but they always fall out and distract me. And I just remember thinking, a friend had sent me this book for like my birthday or Christmas or something. And, you know, it had sat on my shelf for a while. And I remember like when lockdown happened that like spring and summer, I was like, well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything. So why not go ahead and tackle War and Peace? And I loved this book. It made me feel so many emotions, and it has become one of my favorite books of all time. And it's a book that, despite it being quite literally a beast of a book, it is one that I think about all the time, and it is one that I really think that I will probably reread over and over in my lifetime. I've also read Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, and I know for most people I talk to who've read both, that one tends to be their favorite. But War and Peace is definitely my favorite. But basically, War and Peace follows different aristocratic families during the Napoleonic invasion of Russia in 1812. That's kind of all it's about. There are like a crap ton of characters in here, and everyone is Russian, so the names do kind of blend together a little bit. But I would say don't let that deter you, and don't obsess over keeping up with the characters, because your brain will naturally process like who's who as you read. It's not like, I know some people really kind of go in with like lists and like family trees and things like that, and I promise like you don't need to do that. And I know that like reading a book of this size can seem so intimidating, but since it involves so many different characters and different families, some people are you know, you have men that are actually like fighting against Napoleon. You have women that are left back in like Moscow or wherever. You have people in the countryside, yada yada. It almost feels like you're reading a set of like connected short stories. So it's not just like 1,000 pages of one character droning on about their experiences of a war. But yeah, that's kind of my little spiel. I highly recommend. It's one that I really want to reread, and I feel like I read it in the summer, and for me, Russian literature is, you just need to read that during the winter time. So I would love to come back to it one winter. I would also love to come back to Anna Karenina at some point as well, but like I said, I loved this one so much. It's the one I'll definitely be rereading first. All right, friends, thank you so much for listening to me babble on about books that I want to reread. Please let me know if you read any of these books and you also plan on rereading them, or any books that you really love that you hope to come back to and reread throughout the next few years as well. I will see you guys very soon in my next video. Bye.